Hey everybody, in this lesson we're going to start exploring a software called Adobe Premiere Pro. Adobe Premiere is another video editing software. And I will be honest, when I first got involved with Adobe Premiere, I didn't actually want to learn it. I was a tried and true Avid Media Composer editor, and I thought that Adobe was going to be weird and different and unusual, and maybe I'd be really bad at it, and it was kind of scary. But then something really special happened to me. I got this Adobe Premiere Pro pillow, and I realized, well, if I'm going to use the pillow, I need to learn how to use the software as well. No, honestly, the truth is, I started using another software, Adobe After Effects. And if I was using Adobe After Effects so much, it might be a good idea to start using Adobe After Effects with Adobe Premiere as my video editing system, because they're owned by the same company and they work really well together. And here's the truth. When I first got involved with Adobe Premiere, I was a jerk about it. I was stubborn and closed-minded, and if this button wasn't the same button on this software that it was in this software, or this function didn't work this way, it made no sense, and it was weird, and it was wrong. But I was closed-minded. So I'm going to ask you to all not be so closed-minded as I was. You got to consider that all software is going to be a little bit different. And honestly, there are things that I love about Avid Media Composer that I think is weird about Adobe Premiere. And there's things I love about Adobe Premiere that I wish Avid would do. But all software is different. You just got to consider that they're all working in their own same ways. You're going to see some things that are similar. You're going to see some source record windows. You're going to see a timeline. You're going to see tracks and layers and patching and audio, decibel controls, and all these things. They're going to be in the software. But maybe some of the buttons are different. Maybe some of the ways in which they work are a little bit odd or confusing. But we'll work through it. We'll make sense of it. We'll make it really easy and really simple to work with. And we'll start with some fundamentals, and we'll show you how basically all editing systems work. Or most of the editing systems that I've encountered. That said, take your time, we'll watch through these videos, and we'll see what we can come up with and see if we can make something amazing. Or at least, learn how to do something a little bit easier. Alright, let's get started. Alright, so for this lesson we are going to begin to explore Adobe Premiere Pro. We have looked at some other video editing software, and we have looked at some other software in general, but for this, we're going to just take a first look at Adobe Premiere Pro and see what some of the features are and how it works. So I'm going to go to the taskbar and open up Adobe Premiere Pro. And we're going to let this open. Shouldn't take too long since I've opened it once already today. And we bring to the welcome home screen here. It says home over here, and we have the home screen. We have some previous projects that you may have worked on that you can just click and open, but for this we're going to go from the home screen and go right here to new project and begin to open up a new project inside of here, which brings us to this trifecta screen here. This is the new Adobe interface that has an import window, an edit window, and an export window, where these are interfaces or screens or sections. It's just a workflow of a mindset that Adobe Premiere has introduced in their newer versions of Adobe, and it just basically says, hey, you know, we want to work in this methodology. We want to work when importing stuff and then editing it and then exporting it. And this is pretty much how ultimately every editing system works, but we're making it easy for you by having these three areas here. Notice you can't click on the edit or export yet, and that is because you haven't made a project yet. So we're going to go here and make a project. This is project name, and I'm going to call this project called Northlands. Northlands with a Z. Maybe we'll capitalize the Z. So Northlands right here. Great. But it's going to ask us for the project location. So right now it's putting it on the desktop. You could put this on an external drive or some kind of hard drive or something else like there. We're going to choose location. So the desktop would be good. It has some other locations you can choose, but we're going to choose location. It's going to say here, we'll leave it in the desktop, but for here, we're going to make a new folder. And I'm going to make a new folder, and I'm going to call this, say, Premiere Projects. This is the place where I'm going to put all of my Premiere projects. So I'm doing a bit of the media management myself. So I'm going to choose this. So I'm going to put the Northlands in this Premiere project. Now, like I said, this interface is for importing footage. So that's the first thing you're going to do. You're going to create a project, but you're also going to import footage. Now, I could skip importing the footage altogether, but I could also just say create down here and create a project. But Adobe offers you some options to work with some of this footage. And so Premiere says, hey, do you want to bring in some footage while you're making your first project? Well, yeah, let's bring in the first project. So I'm going to go to my external hard drive here, and I have my external hard drive, and I have this folder here called Adobe Media Files because I've been really trying hard to keep all my stuff organized. And so here's my Adobe Media Files. I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to go to this folder here called Northlands, which is my Northlands media. I'm going to open this up and look at Northlands. And it brings up all this footage. I can scroll over and look at some of this footage and see what this different footage is. This is mostly just B-roll footage of this model train museum called Northlands. Just a bunch of footage in here, and I could look at some of this footage. So if I want to, right off the bat, before I even begin making the project, if I want to just bring in some footage with the project so I have some footage to work with, I could do that. And so I could go here and I could click on this one, or I could click on this one, or I could click on one and then hold down Shift and then click on a bunch and click over here. So, just same way you grab stuff on any computer interface, you grab in a whole bunch of footage and you can bring in a whole bunch of footage there. Now, if this footage was in a weird place, let's say, for example, if this footage was in some SD card or some compact flash card or some other drive or in my downloads folder or some other strange place, and I want to do some media management, yeah, I could go back to the desktop and I could start moving files around and create a singular folder for all of my footage. That would probably be a smart idea. Well, Adobe has decided to make that a little bit easier by offering you an option over here that says, hey, copy media. And so you can turn on copy media and it asks you some questions here about what do you want to do. You're going to put the copied file destination in the same as project. Or you can choose some other location. You could say choose location or put it on the Creative Clouds or whatever it may be, etc. But we don't need to do that because I know that I've taken the liberty of doing all the media management for myself, and I don't really need to copy it to some location because I know exactly where it is and it's exactly where I want it to be. I've taken the time to do that outside of Adobe Premiere. So we'll skip that. It asks us here, do we want to make, while we're making a project, hey, you're going to make a new project, do you want to make a new bin? Now in Avid Media Composer, we talked about creating bins, and we could make a bin called BRoll. We could click on this and turn this on over here and create a bin here called BRoll and make ourselves a BRoll bin if we wanted to, if we needed to, if that was important to us, we create a bin called BRoll. I'm going to skip that because in Adobe Premiere, you don't actually have to work with bins. Bins are like folders. They just call them bins because it sounds cooler. Avid does it, Adobe does it, I believe other software may do it as well, but I don't need to make bins. You actually don't need to create bins to bring stuff into the project. All the materials save inside the project. It asks us if we want to create a new sequence over here. So do we want to make a new sequence? I don't know. We could create a new sequence, call this, film master or something, and make some kind of master project sequence. And we have all that as an option, but again, I don't want to do that just yet. We're just going to start kind of simple. Yeah, we'll bring in some footage. We won't go crazy, but we'll just have some footage here. It asks us if we want to transcribe the footage. We can actually transcribe the footage and put labels in the footage. This is just B-roll, so I don't think it needs to be transcribed. It's just the sounds of model trains going by, so it's not really worth it. You can look at this footage, you can scale this up and look at bigger frames, bigger thumbnails. You can look in what's called grid view here. This is grid view, or you can look in what's called list view, which gives us some more detailed information about it. You can look at either of these views and have this here. You can sort based on different types of footage. Over here you can change your display types if you want to look for just video files or just audio files or just images. You could display certain types. And then this folder, or this little eyepiece right here, allows you to look in what are called file directories. If you're familiar with working with Canon XF cameras, or if you're working with Sony HD cameras or Sony XD cameras, you'll see that sometimes, like the AVC HD format that is common in a number of cameras, will compile all this footage as usually MTS files into a smaller folder and kind of piece them out that way. This is a way of looking through those different file directories, and file directories are a really popular thing in cameras to kind of not just put it on the card. It puts it into a small file directory that it makes up for itself, and each camera has its own different file directory, which is sometimes nice but sometimes really difficult to just grab different footage because it's all in a different folder or some other directory methodology like that. We're going to skip that for now. We're just going to bring that footage in. I do want to let you know that if you do highlight footage, I ran into this problem more than once. If you do highlight footage and then you stepped out and grabbed footage from someplace else, this is now retained. So you can grab footage from a whole bunch of different places, which is really wonderful, except you might have clicked on something like an entire folder and then forgot that you left it checked. And now that it's checked, it's going to bring all of that footage inside of there. But we haven't done that, I hope. So we're going to hit create and bring this in. It's going to make my project. It's going to bring all my footage into my project and create. And you're going to see it just brought into all that footage into the project. Now we're in a weird view right now. We're in a weird workspace right now. Here, this is what it was called the captions and graphics workspace. But I don't really like that. So I'm going to go to something simple and default. We're going to go to Windows, Workspaces, and choose the editing workspace, which actually we're on the editing workspace, interestingly enough. We just have a bunch of other stuff open up. So this is a weird way of looking at the workspace and working the interface. So I'm going to reset to the saved layout. And so here I'm going to say reset to save layout, and it's going to put us back to the default layout, which looks a little bit more normal or more like Adobe Premiere Pro should look. So this is the default layout of the workspace here, and you'll see that we have some common things. We have a source window, we have a program window, so this is basically good old-fashioned source record, editing from one screen to the other screen. We have a timeline down here. We have some tools over here, and we have some different windows here, starting with a project window. Now notice we made a project window. We did not make any bins here. So we have all this B-roll just living in this project window right here, and we're just looking at it there. There's something called a media browser, there's a libraries folder, there's an info folder, an effects folder, a markers folder, and then there's a history folder, which you can actually look at your undos there like so. But we're gonna go back here to the Northlands project folder, and we're gonna create the project folder here. So this is our default interface. Little audio meters over here. And so we have our interface like there. You'll notice here that there are some other interfaces that we can work with. So if you go to Windows, Workspaces, you could look at, say, the graphics or the captions and graphics workspace. And you could say caption and graphics, and it would look like this. Or you go to Windows, and if you're doing more audio work, you could bring up audio and say, create an audio-based workspace, and it would look more like this. So there's different windows, different workspaces. They're laid out a little bit differently just for the way you're kind of working. If you're working in, say, I don't know, color, there's some color workspace that brings up the lumetri scopes and brings some color controls that you'd have here. We want to go back here to Windows, Workspaces, and back to Editing. And so now we're back in the Editing workspace there. You'll also notice that you can bring up some other windows here. So if you look to Windows, you can see that if you wanted to work in the editing, but you wanted to bring up the lumetri scopes, for example, you could bring up the lumetri scopes, and they normally load up right here. So if you had scopes, vector scopes, waveforms, RGB parade, those kind of things, you could have those there. Now you could go to the little 3 lines right next to this, and then 3 lines right next to this. You could close this panel and say, hey, I don't want this anymore. We'll go back to Source Window. You'll notice you have a source window, an effects controls, an audio clip mixer. These are kind of tabs over inside of this window. So this is kind of the tab interface that we've seen in other software and things that are commonplace like this. But this is kind of the default workspace. Again, if you make a mess, and again, you can make a mess. You could say, let's grab here, let's grab the source window and grab it and pull it loose and have it kind of, or let's pull it over here and have it in this corner here. So now we have this like this, and then we can grab the timeline window and drag that up and put it over here. Now the timeline window's over here, which looks totally weird. And then we could actually close the program window and say, hey, I don't want this window anymore. Well, why would you not want that window? You're going to need the program window to watch what you're doing. But yeah, you decided that you want to change the interface and have all these things moved over to different places. You can move these over and create some kind of a organization that works for you. Now, if you loved this organization and you thought it was fantastic, yeah, I mean, do it. You can actually go here and say Windows and, Workspaces and save as a new workspace. Save as a new way. So let's do this. Let's go back to editing. I'll show you an example. Windows, Workspaces, and we're going to reset the editing workspace back to the saved layout. And I'll show you something crazy. I'm going to take the timeline. I'll put the timeline up here and the timeline there, and I'll have the source window down here, kind of like this. And then we'll have the source window here, and then we'll have the program window next to it, like there. So now we have timeline over source window, and I'm going to actually put in the source window here, like this. We'll get rid of the, I don't know, we'll do the effects controls maybe just smaller, or maybe the audio clip mixer we'll put in the, over here into this bar here, and the metadata over into this bar here, like this, and the effects controls over into this bar here. And now the timeline is on top. This is what I wanted to do. The timeline is on top, the source window and the program window are on the bottom. I mean, who would do that? Who would put the timeline on the top and the source and the program window on the bottom? That makes no sense at all. That's totally weird and strange and frightening. I don't like it. I'll tell you a true story. My friend Roger used to do this. He used to work with the timeline on the top and the source and the program window on the bottom, and it never made sense to me. And I was like, that's antithetical to everything I've ever learned about an editing system. It was always source and program on the bottom and top. Well, if I wanted to, I could go here and go to Workspaces and save this as Save as New Workspace and call this Roger way. Roger that. Yeah, and so we can Roger that. And yeah, that just, I mean, there's nothing wrong with this. It just felt weird. It just felt weird to have the windows and the, man, I'm a traditionalist and I just didn't make sense to me. So we're going to go here and go back to Workspaces Editing. And now editing is still set to this way. So we're going to go to Windows, Workspaces, Editing, and then we're going to reset to Saved Layout, which is, Oh, thank God, everything's back to normal. Everything's there. Everything looks so. So you can move windows around, you can open and close windows, but sometimes I have students who will accidentally close the timeline window. It's really easy to do. There's a little X over here that lets you close the timeline window, and they're like, oh my God, where'd my timeline window go? Well, again, you can always go to Window and find your timeline window. Here's your timeline window, Shift 3. Or you can go here to Workspaces and just say, hey, I'm in the editing workspace. Let's just reset to saved layout. And everything's back to normal. So if you do anything weird, anything goes weird, and everything goes strange, you can always reset back to the saved layout and have the saved layout as there. Notice up here there's a little button, which is a Workspaces button. Some people prefer this methodology, where you can go here and you have all the same things. You have all the different workspaces with a little check next to it. You don't have to go to Windows Workspaces. It's all just right here, and you can even reset to save layout and save a new workspace, and you can change a bunch of things about your workspace. But this is, again, just kind of opening up and seeing what Adobe Premiere has and how it works and how the interface works, and looking at some of the footage inside of here. And again, if you want to bring in more footage, since we're in the editing area, you can go back to import and you can say, hey, I would like to bring in some more footage. We're going to bring in some of this footage here, this interview footage. I'm going to click this and say here, bring in some of this, and bring in these 3 interview things and say import here. It's going to ask us if we want to make a new bin. Do we want to copy media? Do we want to do that? Let's just make a new bin. We're going to make a new bin. And these are interview clips, so we're going to call this interviews. And we're going to have an interviews bin when we import this footage here. We're going to say import. We're going to make sure that we're not checked on anything else here. Double check that we're not checked. Double check that we're not checked. Double look that we're not checked. I don't know. You understand the idea. So now we've made a separate bin here called interviews. So let's talk about making bins. So inside here, I'm going to open this up really wide. And we're going to have the bins. If you know about Adobe, one of the things you might notice is that in Adobe, in all of the software, if you have a panel open, so say for example you have the timeline panel, if you hit the accent grave next to the number 1 on the keyboard, or what I sometimes refer to as the tilde key, if you hit the accent grave, you can click on a screen and you can hit the tilde key and it will open that screen up fully. This works in all Adobe programs as far as I know. Tilde again and it will slow it there. So the accent grave, you know that little accent symbol that's next to the 1, underneath the escape key, can open a window bigger. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the project window, and we're just going to open this up bigger so we can see this here. So let's see what we got here. We have an interviews bin, and into the interviews bin, you'll notice there are 3 things. And those 3 things are interviews. Yeah, we're right there. We have also all of this stuff here that is not open. So let's put a bin. Let's just be organized. Let's, because it helps my brain, let's just decide that we're going to put all this footage into here like so. We're going to make a bin for this. So we can go to here to File, New, and make new bin. You'll see the shortcut is Command B, so we can go to File, New Bin, we can go to Command B. This is 2 ways automatically. File, New Bin, and Command B would make a new bin. Excellent. We can also grab all these files and we can do a bin from selection. So we can grab all of these, click on the first one, shift click on the last one, and go to File, and then say New Bin from Selection, which is Shift B. And so we can have that and make a new bin from selection, which would be a nice thing to do. We can also right click and make a new bin. And we can also click on these files here and make a new bin from selection. And so we can have a new bin from selection. So we can do that. Also, I like in this corner here, there is a little button right here. I use this most often, the new bin button here. But in this case, we're going to say, let's go here and make a new bin from selection. So we're going to say new bin from selection. It's going to make a bin, call this bin, but we're going to rename this and call this something else. We'll call this BRoll. And now I have a new bin for BRoll, but I can also hit Command B and make another new bin called audio. Audio files or audio stuff. Yeah, we'll just call audio. I'll make another new bin, call Command B, or hit this button down here. Now, here's the thing to be careful of, and here's a problem that people get into. If they're clicked on a bin, Adobe sometimes is very context sensitive about making new things. So if I click on a bin and I open up a bin, if I click another bin, it's going to put a bin inside of this bin because I'm already clicked on this bin. I'm going to bring another bin in. And this works same thing with importing stuff. So if I went back to import and I said, hey, I have these audio files here, I have this voiceover narration and this music here. If I grabbed in these 2 files here and grabbed these 2 here, if I'm here and I have the audio bin selected when I import this stuff and I don't make another new bin called interviews, but in here, if I grab this stuff in, it should, boom, put this inside the audio bin. And so it put it inside here. 2 items are now inside the audio bin like so. So really be careful of that. Again, if I make here and I say, hey, let's make another new bin right now, what's it going to do? It's going to make a new bin inside of this bin. And now this inside of here says there's 3 items in here. I just made a bin inside of a bin. So I didn't want to be clicked on this when I made a bin. So a lot of times if you're clicked on a bin or clicked on what looks like a folder, even though it's called a bin, if you're clicked on a folder, it will make a thing inside of another thing. And so that's not what we want. Let's go here. Let's make this a little bit smaller again. We're going to hit the tilde key and bring this down to smaller here. By the way, as a detail, I should mention that you can also double click and it will open up the same thing. Double click the name up here, project window, and it will open up here. Same thing with the timeline window. Open it up. So if you find yourself accidentally double clicking and you make your screen nice and big, I have students who do this sometimes. They make things nice and huge, and that's not what they want. So we have these bins here. So in here, when I go to this BRoll bin and I double click it, it opens up a separate window. Now I want to talk about that because that's probably what will not happen by default on Adobe Premiere Pro system as you have it. But we can see that we can open this up and we'll open up a new window. Double clicking opens up a new window in here. We can close this window and have it there. In here, we can open up audio and we can see, hey, we have the 2 audio files. Those are great. We also have this other bin called bin, which I didn't like. This was going to be my sequences bin. So let's take this as a sequences bin. Let's call this sequences. And now we're going to take this and put this down here and put this as a separate bin, not inside this other bin. I made the mistake before. I'm going to fix my bin, and now my bin's there. So let's take a look really quickly at some bins here. So inside the BRoll bin, you'll notice that down in the corner here, there are 2 buttons here, one called List View, one called Icon View. We are right now in Icon View, which allows us to see icons bigger or smaller. I'm just grabbing this slider and seeing this bigger or smaller. But we can also look in this in List View. And like List View is a common view to editing systems, gives us some detailed information about the file and about what's included in the file, and gives us some name stuff. But for BRoll, since this is called BRoll 1 through 10, I don't know if these are really useful to me because I don't know the differences between these pictures. I mean, maybe I memorized what BRoll number 5 is. I don't know. So let's take a look in picture in Icon View and see, okay, BRoll number 5 just gives me the name of the file and gives me the basic information like there. And so I can look at this file inside of here and have this in these different views as they were. And so cool. I can have these footage inside of here and have this look in a different layout like there. I can also grab these files and move them around and change the order here and have them be in different orders here and just move whichever one I want last or move whichever one I want first and swap the order inside of Icon View there. Again, I can make it bigger or smaller. Look at there. And again, if I scroll over this footage, I can sometimes see that if I scroll over this footage, I can scroll back and forth and see what's in the footage and see how the footage looks and appreciate the footage for what it is. So we do have those controls there. The same thing in the project window. So here in the project window, if you look in List View, I can actually open up little twirl triangles and have these little triangles, and it will tell me what the list of the footage is, and I can move footage back and forth between bins and have it work in here like there. So that's a thing I can do. Now I mentioned before that if I double click on any of these, it opens up a separate window, and the separate window retains whatever mode I was working in, List View or in Icon View, and so I have those controls there. And that is because of some special features that I've done in Preferences. So if I'm in a Mac system, I go to Premiere Pro Preferences, or I believe I can go to File or Edit Preferences on a PC. But I'm going to go to Premiere Pro Preferences and look at some general preferences. So Premiere Pro Preferences General. I believe on the new versions it's called Premiere Pro Settings. So Premiere Pro Preferences, Premiere Pro Settings, same thing, means the same thing. We're going to go to Settings, and we're going to look at some of the settings and what they have and how they work. So first off, at Startup, show the home screen. Yeah, I think at the Startup, show the home screen. Or to open most recent project, I think, yeah, we want to show the home screen, that's fine. This is the one I was going to talk about in here in Bins. In Bins, when you double click, it opens a new window. By default, what it does is it opens a new tab. So now here, if I said here, to double click, it will open up a new tab. So if I'm here in the Northlands project, I go to Northlands project, if I double click interviews, it's going to open up a separate tab next to it. So here's the project, here's the bin as a separate tab open. I don't necessarily prefer this method because I don't really like a lot of tabs. I'm really kind of a minimalist, and I don't know, for some reason opening up a new window is how I learned to work in an editing system. So I like the idea of opening up a separate window that I can close. The tabs, Because then you go back to the projects and you start opening a bunch of different tabs, and now you have multiple tabs open, and I don't know, it's just weird to me. If it works for you, if you're a multi-tab kind of person, like if you're on the internet and you're opening up multiple tabs for different browsers, browser tabs, you can do that. If that makes sense to you, yeah, no shame, no harm to do that. But because now I have to close the panel and close this and say here and close this panel. And I'm not a big fan of closing panels there. I just like a button that I can close the panel. So now we're back in projects. I'm going to go to Premiere Pro, Preferences, General, and I'm going to say Open in New Window. There's also the option of Open in Place. Now it says here that if I double click, it's going to open a new window. If I double click plus holding the Command key, it's going to open in place. And I'll put double click plus the Option key is to open a new tab. And this is going to be the way that I want to work. It doesn't matter for you, it's just the way that I want to work. And so it says here, double click is going to open a new window, plus Command is going to open in place, and Option key is going to open a new tab. I don't need to do this, but if I wanted to, I could do this. So if I double click, opens a new window. And if I have multiple monitors, I could drag this off to another monitor and have multiple screens here and have all my stuff laid out that way. If I hold down Command, if I hold down Option when I hit double click the BRoll, it's going to open up a new tab, which if I ever want to do that, which I don't, but if I ever do want to do that, I can do that as an idea. Now, if I hold down Command, it'll open in place. And this is a way of kind of opening a window inside of another window. This is kind of like almost the interface that your computer does, is when you double click, it opens not a separate location, it just opens up inside of itself. Kind of like when you hit a link on a website. So Command double click will now open this into another window, and now we see here we're in Northlands project / BRoll, so it's kind of opening it into here, which means we could back up and go back to the project things. That's interesting. That's a kind of an internet-based kind of way of doing it. I don't necessarily love that. I still love my default, which is double click opens a new window. I don't know. Maybe that's messy. Maybe that doesn't work for you, but it works for me. It makes sense to me, so that's what I'm going to do. We're going to go back into Premiere Pro Preferences and look at some more preferences here. So we have some preferences here, how it opens up projects in a new tab, opens project in a new window. We can talk about some of that later on. There's some other things. Do we want to show tooltips? Sure, we want to show tooltips. Do we want to auto detect the log video color space? There's some other questions there. Show project and bin in project panel. Yeah, there's some things we're going to show there, etc. Let's move from there because we don't really need that right now. We can look at the appearance controls. We can make this brighter or darker. We can brighten the screen up, make the interactive controls brighter or darker, whatever we want to do. Make the highlight color brighter or darker. There's some controls. We're going to leave it like this for now. We're going to look at this there. I don't know, some other controls we can look at. Audio controls. So the audio automatic time is 1 second, 521 mixdown. Yeah, we don't really care about much there. Play audio while scrubbing. We can talk about this as an idea. So if I have a clip in here, we're going to say, okay, we're going to bring in one of these interview clips, and I'm going to open up one of these interview clips up here. And when I double click, I can open this up into the source window, and here's Bruce. This is Bruce. We're going to go here to Premiere Pro. You'll notice that here, in Premiere Pro Preferences, in Audio, there's an option here for Play Audio while scrubbing, which means that when I drag back and forth, you'll be able to hear it's creating the audio. It's playing back the audio here. I don't know if you can hear that really well on your end, but it's playing back the audio here as you play through, which is a thing that it does. It plays back the audio while you're scrubbing. Sometimes people love this. Sometimes this gets annoying, so sometimes when I'm just clicking through, I don't need to hear a sound every time I click through. But it's going to play a sound every time I click through, which I sometimes don't necessarily love. So I can say here in Premiere Pro Preferences, Audio, turn off Play Audio while scrubbing, and so it won't. Now just, beautiful silence. I just want to see Bruce's face. I don't want to hear him. I just want to enjoy Bruce for who he is without playing this back while scrubbing and have it inside of here. So I have that option there. Let's look at some more preferences, Premiere Pro Preferences, and this is all just the way you want to work. In Audio, let's see if we have anything else there. Maintain pitch while shuttling. This is whether it plays when you play high speed. We'll do this in a second. There, generating waveforms automatically during import. It creates waveforms for you, which is nice, lovely there. Great. We can look at some of the audio hardware, but that's basically how my system is set up, which is fine. The sample rate is 48 kilohertz. That's fine. The auto save. How often does it auto save? Well, it automatically saves every 15 minutes, which is nice. It automatically saves a backup copy in an automatically saved place. So if 15 minutes have gone by, we can look on the desktop and look in Premiere Pro projects, and you might see a folder here called auto saves. We'll create an auto saves folder that'll build here. So we haven't gone that far yet, so we haven't really done anything yet. But if you create an autosave folder, it'll create an autosave folder and say backup copies to there. So if you are worried about crashing, you can have it there, etc. Let's see, collaborations we're not really concerned about right now. Control surfaces we don't really have connected here. Graphics is fine, we're including all the graphics. Labels, sometimes people like to control the labels, control the label colors, and have it in there. What I think is really important is sometimes, so video files or movie files, audio and video files, are set to the color iris. So this color right here is iris. Video files are violet, audio files are Caribbean, stills are lavender, sequences are forest. You can change all this and have different names, different files. If it gets confusing sometimes I don't know. Sometimes let's see if you know violet, Caribbean, violet and Caribbean are too close together. Like violet looks like this, Caribbean looks like that. Well, those are two totally different files, so that's easy to figure out. But sometimes you want a certain color for a certain thing. Again, if that's something you want to do, that's something there. We can look at some other settings here. The media, so when it brings in media, it's determining the media by default is coming in at 30 frames a second drop frame, which means you have to change that automatically. I'm actually to change mine to 23.976 because most of the stuff that I've been working on indeterminate, which means it can't determine what the media frame rate is we're going to set it to 23.976 because most of the stuff I've been shooting recently has been working at 23.976, and that way I don't have to change it every single time I bring it in. And so we have some different questions in here, etc. there. Media cache, we can clean that out every so often if we have something that's taking up the media cache. Memory, how much memory it's using for the systems. Let's see, playback. The pre-roll is 3 seconds, the post-roll is 2 seconds. This is for a lot of times when we're rolling through a clip or rolling around an edit. I'm going to change this to 2 and 2. Make this 2 and 2, yeah, just so if I ever do it like a play around an edit or play around a thing, I can have that there. We'll look at that as we begin to edit, and we'll look at some of those controls there. Maybe we'll change this again. If we're doing trimming, sometimes we trim the edges, then we play back the area around the area we trimmed. We can do that there. The timeline. Okay, so on some systems, and this is, I think, fixed in the newer versions, on some systems, it used to be the video transition. So if you're making a transition effect, if you're making a dissolve or a wipe or some kind of other transition, it used to be set to a number of frames, and it used to be 30 frames. And so 30 frames says, hey, the video default transition duration is 30 frames. Well, if you're working in a 30 frame per second project, that is a 1 second transition. If you're working in a 24 frame per second project, that's a 1 second and 6 frame transition, which is just a weird amount. 1.1 and 6 frame transition. That doesn't make sense to me. That's not something I want to work with. So we're going to skip that and go by seconds. And I think going by seconds, so if I'm working in a 24 frame per second project, it's going to be 24 frames. If we're going to work in 30 frame per second, if we're working in a 60 frame per second project, it's going to be 1 second. It'll just automatically update there. There's some other cool things about how it scrolls through, smooth scrolling versus page scrolling. We can play with that a little bit later. How it makes tracks, whether it snaps the playhead in the timeline when snap is enabled. Some people like this as a feature. I like doing it manually, but we'll talk about that as we go in. But all these settings in here are going to be important. One of the ones that I do care about is in here in the trim settings. You're going to see that it says allow selection tool to choose roll and ripple trim without modifier keys. I will talk about what the heck that means, but man, I'm a big fan of the selection tool choosing roll and ripple trim without modifier keys. That's really important to me. I love that as a setting. I don't know why that's not the default. It makes so much more sense to me that's the default. But again, what I'm saying is that you can control all your settings, you can design all your settings, and make whatever settings you want to and have them laid out like so. So we're going to go right here just for starters. Again, we can bring in some footage. We can say double click and we can open up this footage. It's opening up a new window. We can double click the footage and look at some of this footage. Here's a little train, model train going by, a little out of focus, in focus here. We can drag through and look at this footage in here. We can look at some other footage of some other trains going by. Look at that, some other trains doing their thing. Very exciting, very thrilling. Oh, another train going by. Cool, we have all this different footage in here. all this footage going by. We can obviously click through and watch it. We can play it. We can hit the space bar or hit the play button and play it. And we have all those features inside here. Very much wonderful. We're going to make a new sequence. So I'm going to hit here, and I'm going to go to make a new sequence, which is File, New, Sequence, or Command-N. I do like Command-N. In Adobe After Effects, Command-N is make a new composition. I believe in Photoshop, Command-N makes a new image. And so I do love Command-N, because Command-N for new is for making a new timeline, building a new timeline. So we're going to hit Command-N and build a new timeline. It says in here, drop media here to create a sequence. And so you could do this. You could grab media and you could say, let's grab this B-roll clip and throw this in here and make a new sequence. That way works. I don't necessarily love that way, and I'll tell you why. Because it makes a sequence that's exactly this size and this length and this frame rate and this resolution, and I just don't like the way that it does it. I would like to make my own sequence my own way and build my own sequence, my own design. So I can go to File, New, Sequence, and it brings up my new sequence dialog box. And I just want to talk for a second about the new sequence dialog box and what it has and what it includes. There is a set of presets, and so in the set of presets you see here that there are the RE presets and the ABC Inter presets and the ABC HD presets and the Canons and the Digital SLR presets and the Avid DNX HD and HR presets and some other different presets, Panasonic DVC Pro, ProRes, Red, RAW, and you're like, hey, I don't have any of these cameras. I'm not using these cameras. Or do I have to use, if I shot the footage in different cameras, which one do I use? Well, these are just presets. And the way the presets work are, they're just for people who say, hey, I don't know what I'm working with, but I just happen to know that I shot this footage with a Panasonic DVC Pro HD camera. And so I can go here to DVC Pro HD, and I can say, okay, I know I worked with a DVC Pro HD. I know I worked with it 1080p, so I worked at 1920 by 1080p, and now I worked with 1080p at 24 frames a second, and that's what I worked with. And so it'll make a setting here that says, hey, for editing MXF materials, recorded in 1080p or 1080p 24PA, and so with a Panasonic P2 camera. And so I know that it's going to make this size, 1280 by 1080. I know it's going to make it 24 frames a second. I know I'm going to work in DVC Pro HD, and I have this exactly with these settings. So I don't have to dial in all of my own settings myself. It's just going to work with the settings that I have and just make the settings that I want here for the project. And so if I'm shooting this, I shot this with a Canon XF 705, and so I can go here to Canon XF, and so Canon XF, if I don't know all the settings, and you can go here and you can look at the footage and say, let's right click, and we can say Properties, and in here in Properties it says, okay, this footage is an MXF, it's 1920 by 1080, and has a frame rate of 23.976, audio format of 48 kilohertz, cool, and so, yeah, this is all what this footage is. So when I make a new sequence, Command-N, I say, man, how do I get all these settings? Well, let's go here into Canon XF. Let's see, we said it was 1080p, and it was Canon XF 1080p at 23.976, and so I have this here, and so let's see, Canon XF at 24 frames per second. So this is Canon XF 1920 by 1080, 23.976. Hey, it did everything for me. Here's the secret. If I went to, say, for example, digital SLR here, and I opened up the digital SLR, I could look at the 1080p settings and say, hey, these are pretty much the same exact settings. So why are both of them here? Why is this pretty much the same exact settings as this, as well as probably 1080p 23.976? Yeah, why are these the same exact settings? There are rarely any differences between there. They're all doing basically the same thing. They're pretty much working the same way. But I wasn't working with the DSLR, so I don't know any better of what my settings were. This just takes all the equation out of there. Are there redundancies in here? Yes, there are absolutely redundancies in here, and you don't need all these presets. You need a handful of presets, but it just makes it easier for first-time users to say, hey, I don't know what all these settings mean, but I know what camera I worked with, and so I'm just going to choose the camera I worked with, and it just makes my life a lot easier and a lot more straightforward. Now, if you want to, you can say, let's not do this, and let's go to settings. And settings, you can actually choose. So right now we're choosing the Canon XF 1080 there, editing mode, which is a time base of 23.976, which is what we chose before. And it has all these controls, and some of these you can change. So you could change the display format, of how it's working. You could change the pixel aspect ratio and change to a different there, whether it's using upper field or whatever it may be, but these are there. You can change the video previews and change some settings here. One of the things you can also do in here is you could also say, go into editing mode and say, for editing mode, we could say, let's choose, instead of one of these presets, we could make a custom, and now we can make our own. So we could choose, we could make a preset that say, okay, we're gonna make a preset that's going at, let's say 23.976, but in this case, we're gonna choose the frame size here to be 1080 by 1920. And so we're going to use square pixels. It's going to be progressive, 23.976. We're going to use the Rec 709 color space. That's fine. Yeah, this is there. And we're going to make a sequence. We're going to make a brand new sequence like this. Except here, we're going to take this preset, and we're going to save this preset and call this, say, vertical video. And this is for people who are holding their phones the wrong way when they're shooting video. They're holding it vertically because they're making TikTok videos, and so they have it vertical video. And I'm going to put in descriptions this awful vertical way that people should never use. But kids, am I right? Anyway, so these are for people who are using their cell phone videos to make cell phone videos. This is just the cell phone, pixel resolution aspect ratio there, and we'll say OK, and we'll make that preset there. So now we have that preset, and if you look, it says here there's one for vertical video. So I have one for Instagram. That's a vertical video that's 1080 by 1080, which is the default for Instagram. I have a vertical video one that's there. I have one for a certain course that I'm teaching that makes it easier for my students to just say, hey, I don't know what preset I'm using, but I'm using 1920 by 1080. So they don't even have to look for which camera they're using. I just created a custom preset for them to make it really super simple for them. But in this case, I know I shot this with a Canon XF, 1080p, 24 frames a second, and 23.976 actually. And so here, I'm going to make a new sequence. We're going to call this, we're going to call this promo spot. This is going to be a promotional spot. We're going to make this as a promo spot here, and we're going to make a promo spot. We're going to build this sequence and have it in there like so, and say OK. Now when I say OK, boom, it took the sequence and it put it inside of BRoll. So it built a sequence. Here's my sequence right here. Great. But it put the sequence in here inside of BRoll, which is clearly not what I wanted it to do and not good for me, not my friend. And why did it do that? Well, it did that because, guess what? I was working in, I had the BRoll bin selected when I made that. So that's in the wrong place. So let's open this up wide again. We're going to go to the tilde key and open this wide again. We're going to look at promo spot. Has a little icon. This is a little icon for a sequence. Inside of here, we have this here and say, we're going to drag this into sequences because this is a sequence. We're going to drag it to there and put it in sequences. Now the promo spot is in sequences and everything is healthy and organized the way that I want. Everything's there. I'm going to hit the tilde key again, the accent grave, and now my interface is laid out exactly what I want. I have a sequence, I have some footage, I have some stuff there. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to hit file save. File save project. File save, good old Command S. And just say this. Cool, we are there. And this is the interface. I mean, this is nothing too complicated or too crazy. This is a basic, simple design of how the interface is laid out. Pretty much straightforward, but it works. It does its stuff. It does what it's supposed to do. Down here, you can do some more things with the interface. You can do some other adjustments here. You'll notice that I have a sequence that has nothing going on here, and I have a source window here, and there are little buttons on the corner here, and these little buttons will allow us to add more buttons. And so this little plus here adds buttons. So let's see if there's any other buttons I want to add. So we're going to go open this thing called the button editor. I am a fan. I'm a fan of the safe title area, the safe margins. We're going to click and bring that down and put that there. Awesome. I do like, let's see what else we got. The ruler I can just bring up with the Command R, so I don't really need to show the ruler there. Let's see, anything else that is really important to me? I do like the play loop button, the loop playback button. Sometimes I want to turn on play looping. I have it there. We'll bring in toggle proxies. Actually, toggle proxies is already there, so I don't need to bring that in. So if a button's already here, I don't need to add a button there for any reasons. Toggle VR? Maybe toggle VR? I don't know. Maybe snap and program monitor? Nah, not really worth it. Comparison view? Yeah, maybe. There's some buttons that are there automatically, but we can add some buttons. I think that's going to be good. We're going to add those buttons. Maybe we'll add some more buttons later as we go through. Add a marker. We still have add a marker over there, so that's fine. We can go to the source window as well. In the source window, we can say, hey, let's bring up the button editor. Again, other things we may want to do here that's not here by default. We can also bring up the margins in here, have that as a button that's available to us. Some other controls. Again, play a loop, I guess, maybe. Loop playback. We can have that there, set it there. Toggle proxies is already there. So again, you can make buttons as you wanted to. So right now we can bring up the save title, save action, save margins control if we want to see that. That'll come in either of our windows, and we have that available to us as an idea. So this is how we're going to set up our interface, and this is basically how we're going to set up an interface to work with. Again, can we work with other workspaces? Absolutely, we can make other workspaces and different methodologies of working, but this is pretty much the introductory to how the workspaces looks. We'll play with some other stuff, and we'll start to make some more sense of this. If you've never edited before, I understand it's all a little bit weird and crazy, but this is some fundamentals of how the system is designed and how the system is made. I think that's pretty good for a start. I think that's just a start to get you in the interface. Again, we're getting into some importing ideas and some really working with media in here. We're going to look at something called the media browser and look at something a little bit further as another idea. But there's some other things we can do here and some other options that we have. Import, edit, and then eventually export. This will be our third little interface window here. But we're going to be working predominantly in here and building stuff here like so. Again, you can look at this footage for now and play this footage back. Play it back. Sounds there. We can hit the play button. We can scrub through. We can hit the left and right arrows to go one frame forward or one frame back. And we have that inside the interface there. We'll look at some other keys to allow us to play backward and forward, as some of you might know. Anyway, that's going to be just an intro for working in Adobe Premiere. I think I'm going to make this really easy, and I think we're going to be pretty good. So, until a future lesson, enjoy.